Welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports. This is the NFL Week 9 DFS Slate Playbook. Today is Saturday, November 7th, 2020, and we're talking NFL Week 9 specific DFS content here right now on the channel. We're going to be covering quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, all the core plays, players, picks, stacks, things that you should build around this upcoming Sunday in NFL DFS. So sit back, relax, and let's talk some daily fantasy football. This is No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Hey guys, good evening. I hope you're all doing well. It is really late on Saturday night. We're approaching midnight actually, so by the time you guys actually watch this video, it might actually be Sunday. And I apologize to any of you that maybe have been waiting for this video, this NFL Week 9 DFS video here on the channel, but it's been a crazy week. I have not put out much content this week at all. I don't think I actually put out any videos this week until this particular video, simply because there was a lot going on, right? If you're in the United States, this was a pretty busy week for just about everybody with the election and everything else that's going on. So just kind of had my attention focused there for the last week. And then in terms of that, we had a lot going on with the NFL, a lot of tests, positive tests, things like that going on. So kind of the later the better for this particular video, but we're jumping into it. We're jumping into Week 9 here. As always, I thank you guys so much for finding your way here to the channel, clicking on this video in particular. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you are subscribed to No Huddle Fantasy Sports, this channel. Also, make sure you follow me at No Huddle FS over on Twitter. Again, I haven't published anything this week, so if you didn't join me last week, well, you really missed out. You're going to want to subscribe to the channel because we crushed it last week. I have a quick funny story. I won't waste too much time on it. But in general, we had Dalvin Cook as our number one play on the slate. And of course, if you played Dalvin Cook last week, it's pretty impossible for you not to cash unless you really screwed up, especially with the other plays. We played Herbert, we played Keenan Allen, we played some of the best plays really across the slate, the best play on the slate, as well as other players. But in general, for me, FanDuel screwed up. Of course, they continue to screw up each and every week. Usually they have, if you do mass entries, 150 lineups or more, you can typically set your lineups and then go in an hour or so before and edit all of those lineups. It's called mass editing. Well, that feature broke like 20 minutes before lock or something like that, and so you couldn't edit lineups. I had 100% Dalvin Cook in my lineups. I had 100% Higgins for Cleveland also, who got a solid 2 or 3. Nonetheless, the fact that I had, I think it was Williams, 100%, Cook, 100%, Higgins, 100%, and then some wide receiver that did well. We had a really good week. I mean, 3 of the 4 guys that got locked into my lineups, literally all 150 lineups, ended up doing pretty well, except for Higgins. And then I was able to, it took a long time, edit through all of those lineups and select a couple of different quarterbacks from the 4 o'clock game. So nonetheless, though, still excellent week. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please make sure if you enjoy these videos, if they are helpful, that you are subscribed again. I preach that a lot, but it really does help this channel. It helps all channels here on YouTube. It's the easiest way to help support a creator. Obviously, this channel isn't big. I do appreciate you all, tuning in and being a part of this channel. It does mean a lot to me. But nonetheless, let's move on. Let's talk Week 9 here. This is I wouldn't say an odd week, but there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that I think you guys should key in on in Week 9. Sorry, a lot of ins there. But for the Slate Outlook here, again, we have 11 total games. It's a normal week in terms of games. Doesn't look like anything's going to be postponed. That is good. But there have been a ton of positive tests. Again, on this channel, I cannot mention what those are related to because they try to take down your channel for some reason. I'm not sure why. Nonetheless, the important thing this week is there are literally, I think they mentioned every single team in the NFL going into this week has had at least one positive test on their team. So you're going to want to pay attention. And I know the Ravens are really struggling with a lot of positive tests right now. You're seeing a lot of lines in terms of Vegas move a lot, but it's something you're going to really want to pay attention to. As of now, it seems like most players that I'm going to mention are okay, but as with any week, in this particular year, in 2020, anything can happen. But key in on that. That does help. You can actually attack certain teams based upon defensive players, things like that being missing due to this illness, right? So make sure you key in on that and pay attention as we approach Week 9. Now, I mentioned already several teams with positive tests, but beyond that, what are we looking at for the week? I think this week is going to be a very balanced quarterback wide receiver stacking week. And by balance, I mean I'm not looking to pay way up at any particular either quarterback or running or wide receiver, but I am paying up at running back. So being balanced at quarterback and wide receiver is going to help that. I'll show you guys, as always, some of my core plays here, and they're going to make sense together, right? I'm going to show you not only the most expensive quarterback, the most expensive running back, and the most expensive wide receiver, but we will talk about what actually fits in week 9. And then, of course, with tight end, it is tight ends, right? We just got to look at what fits. This is a decent week, in my opinion, in terms of pricing for tight ends. A lot of guys have been priced, I wouldn't say priced down, but they're better priced, so we can actually make them fit. But nonetheless, that's the outlook for week 9. Let's first talk about Vegas totals, as always. Very important for us to do that here. Looking at it compared to week 8 especially, a lot of lines are back up above 50 in terms of an over-under. So we should have a higher scoring week compared to week 8 in week 9 here. Several teams with really high totals in particular. Some of them I'll quickly mention. Seattle, Kansas City in particular is above 30, 31.5 for a team total there. So really, really high. But Seattle, Kansas City, Minnesota, Houston, all of those teams projected at 28 or more points. That's kind of what I'm highlighting here. Then, of course, you have 4 or 5 total games, depending on how you look at it. Maybe even 6, depending on the Denver-Atlanta game. All projected above 50 in terms of an over-under. So something to pay attention to. Teams you may want to avoid this week. Of course, the Giants are projected under 20 in terms of an implied team total. Dallas is projected at 13.8 points right now. Really, really bad. Ezekiel Elliott may also be out of that game. If so, it's going to be bad. But those teams, keep those in mind or out of mind. Don't be playing too many players from those games. So without wasting too much more time, let's talk about core plays. Let's start with the quarterback position. The first guy I want to mention here, probably my favorite play as of right now on the slate at quarterback, is Deshaun Watson. Keep in mind, this guy's going to be top 5 owned this week, possibly top 3. I don't think he's going to be the number 1 owned guy. I think you're going to see definitely Russell Wilson up there. I think you're definitely going to see somebody like Justin Herbert. Again, we played him last week. Now I think it's time to come off of him because of ownership jumping up on him. Nonetheless, I do like Deshaun Watson, even if he's in that top 5 ownership. He's $8,300 on FanDuel, $7,100 on DraftKings. Decent price on him. He's kind of that mid-high tier. I don't know what you would call it, but he's not the highest price guy. He's not even, I don't think, in the top 3 highest price guys. So he fits nicely. He does help, going to him does help fit some more expensive players later on. But he's playing on the road this week, which we do like for quarterbacks. He's playing in Jacksonville. That game, depending on where you look at it, 49.5, 50 over under. So that threshold of 50 is kind of hit there in terms of a game with a lot of scoring. We want to see that for quarterbacks and stacks especially. Houston is a favorite on the road at -6.5. If they were at home, I might be a little bit off of this play, but the fact they're on the road in Jacksonville, still at 6.5, it's a big favorite, but nonetheless still on the road here. I don't mind it. They have a really, really nice implied team total, which goes well with him and goes well with the stack at 28.5. Now the total, Jacksonville's going to be missing their starting quarterback, Gardner Minshew. So that's why this total is so high, and it may continue to increase. That is the only worry. If you guys are worried about Deshaun Watson at all, the one thing I would caution you on is the fact that it could turn into a blowout. Now, I don't have much faith in David Johnson. I think even in a blowout, it's like you're still going to see Deshaun Watson do a ton of damage. So I still like Deshaun Watson. That's kind of my disclaimer for him. Again, road favorite here with a great implied team total. He has 4 straight games of 300 passing yards or more. He's coming off his bye week. So if you go back, though, to the 4 games before that, has been really, really red hot in terms of passing. 11 total passing touchdowns in his last 4 games also. So think about that. Basically, his floor for the last 4 games has been 300 plus passing yards and 2 or 3 touchdowns. You'll take that. The guy does offer a rushing floor, a little bit of a bonus there with his legs. He's not as elite as he has been in the past, but he definitely can at times run the ball 7 times for 50 yards, get you that little bit of a floor there, which we always like with our quarterbacks. Now, a couple of other things I think are very important, as always. Top pass blocking advantage for him on this slate at plus 55% against that really, really bad Jacksonville defensive front, meaning he'll have all the time in the world. I'm not worried about him getting too much pressure. Just more fire, more fuel to the fire here to play Deshaun Watson. In terms of the defense he's facing, Jacksonville is just really, really bad, especially versus the pass. They're 28th overall in the NFL in terms of the passing yards per game given up. They're 31st overall in the NFL in terms of completion rates, and they're allowing the third most fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. And then their secondary overall from Pro Football Focus is graded out at 28th. So just really, really bad defense, especially versus the pass. Deshaun Watson in a great spot this week versus Jacksonville on the road. The only downside, as I mentioned, could easily turn into a blowout. I don't think so on my part. Hopefully this game will stay within a touchdown. But nonetheless, really like Deshaun Watson this week. One of my top core plays. The other guy here, we're completely flipping the script. We're going extremely risky in my opinion here. But I am looking to make this work. And I'm going to talk to you guys about some very expensive but great plays at running back. And you have to get contrarian. You have to get cheaper a quarterback to make that work. So I'm being honest with you. I'm going to play some Drew Lock here. And Drew Lock is, he hasn't had the greatest season by any means, but I think he's in a decent spot to pay off at his salary. And again, it's what you get by playing him with other players. So he is $7,200 on FanDuel, $52 on DraftKings. The price on DraftKings is extremely low. Really good price there. Playing on the road in Atlanta with a 49 over-under. Now, they are underdogs. I don't know why I have it listed here, but I believe they're 4-point underdogs, 3 or 4-point underdogs on the road, 23 implied team total. So that implied team total isn't super attractive. Nonetheless, I think we can get it done. I think that game in particular at 49, I'm betting on it. Literally, I'm betting on it to go over that 49. I think it's one of those games that is an easy over in terms of points scored, and I'm hoping because we're going to play Drew Lock here. But again, this is not for the faint of heart. This is a Drew Lock play. If you don't like it, I completely understand. I'm being transparent with you guys. This is my cheap quarterback play. If you have to play a cheap quarterback, this is the guy I'm looking at. He offers great value. He allows basically, as I mentioned, the full stack of the high-priced running backs should you go with him and go with his wide receivers in stacks. Now, again, high risk, high reward. This is only a GPP play. I don't mention that often. I'm a GPP-only player. But I'm especially trying to just express the point here. He is a GPP-only play. Now, let's talk about what he's been doing. He has been good. He's coming off a good, excellent Week 8 versus the Chargers. He actually had a really good second half in that game where he threw 3 total touchdowns. I think they came back and won that game also. Just a really good spot last week in Week 8. Shows some promise. I mean, this is their guy. They're not going anywhere else. This is their future. They have some good young receivers around him. I think this, again, is a sneaky shootout spot versus Atlanta. Atlanta's defense is really bad. Atlanta's, I mean, we all know this, right? They give up basically every lead, and they've been just, basically destroyed through the air this year. But in general, I think it's a sneaky spot for a shootout. I believe it'll go over the 49 over-under. This is a big play offense versus a big play defense. And you wouldn't think that's the case here with Drew Lock, with the Broncos. But this is an interesting stat. There's a guy you guys should be following online through Twitter. I believe he's affiliated with Pro Football Focus. His name's Ian Hartitz. He puts out some really interesting stuff each and every week regarding big play potential offenses versus big play potential defenses. And by big play on defense, I mean they're giving up the big play. And this is one of his best matchups for the week. So I think it is a sneaky spot for this Denver offense. And also, in addition to that, what he has shown is that it's an efficient passing offense, the Denver Broncos, versus a bad passing defense. So it's efficiency versus inefficiency, big play versus a team that gives up big plays. You like that. I think that's a good spot. Again, it's a value play here. It's a risky play. You're playing it off of the salary. That's kind of the idea here. I don't expect him to be the best quarterback on the slate, but I definitely think he can pay off his salary, especially on DraftKings. In addition to all of that, this is one of the top highest pace games on the slate. I believe it's top 3, second or third overall. So it's going to be a faster pace game for the Broncos on the road in a dome. It's going to be just higher scoring in my opinion. And then finally, the last thing I will mention here, if you're into DVOA, if you're into how defenses are ranked, some of those more advanced metrics, they're ranked 22nd, so they're bottom 10 in the league, that Atlanta defense. So a good spot in my opinion for Drew Lock to keep that hot streak going coming out of that second half against the Chargers last week. He's my cheap quarterback. I think there's other plays at quarterback, absolutely. But again, this is going to fit with the next couple of guys I will mention at running back. It's going to make them all kind of gel together and make a complete lineup for you guys. So speaking of the next couple of guys here, the guys we're going to be spending money on are the running backs, right? Derrick Henry stands out to me as the guy I will be putting a lot of faith in this week. On most slates, I typically avoid Derrick Henry. He's not a guy I play a lot of because he gets a lot of ownership, and I just think his floor is somewhat, or his ceiling, I'm usually wrong, but his ceiling is somewhat capped because he doesn't do a lot in the passing game. Nonetheless, this is a week when I think the ownership is going to come down on him. Everybody's going to flood to Dalvin Cook. We played him last week. Let's let everyone else get on him this week, and let's find the next guy here that's going to explode. And not that Derrick Henry hasn't done it any other week, but he's in a great spot, I think, again this week, especially with that lower ownership. That's the play here, is we're trying to find those running backs that are those elite, high-scoring running backs that are going to get a little bit less ownership than the main guys. Derrick Henry's that guy this week, at least so far. If things change, maybe I'll change, but I don't think it's really late at night on Saturday. I don't think anybody's going to change their mind here. Derrick Henry, in my opinion, is going to be a modest-owned guy, about 6 in terms of where I think he'll fall is going to be ranked around 6 to 10 in overall running back ownership. So kind of, sneaky there in my opinion. I mentioned it here. So he's $8,900 on FanDuel, $7,900 on DraftKings. It's an expensive play. You're going to have to find the money to fit him. He is playing at home, which is a good thing, versus Chicago. 46.5 over-under, so not the prettiest over-under, but Tennessee is a good favorite at -6 with a 26.3 implied team total. First thing I'm going to say here is winter is coming. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, hopefully that hits home for you guys. But what I mean by that is Derrick Henry tends to get better and better and better and better as the season goes on. That offensive line is so good. Derrick Henry is that bulldozer running back. Typically, as winter comes, as it gets later into fall, early into winter, Derrick Henry tends to get a little bit better each and every game. So that's coming, man. And Derrick Henry's going to continue to ball here, barring injury, knock on wood. But he does check a lot of boxes for us this week, too, in terms of the running backs we're looking for. He's playing at home. He's a decent favorite at a touchdown or more. He has a solid implied team total at 26+, and he plays a ridiculously high snap count. Now, yes, you do sacrifice a little bit with him because he's not as heavily involved in the passing game, but it doesn't matter. If you go back through game logs, he still gets, I think his minimum is like 18 rushing attempts. You add in anything through the air, and he gets above 20. I believe so far for this year, he's averaging 23+ rushing attempts per game. That's an absurd number. Guys barely get there with receiving work. So this guy's getting all that just on the ground. Again, modest ownership is really the attractive thing here. He's third in the NFL in terms of yards after contact. That makes sense. The dude is just a monster when he runs the ball. Tennessee's offensive line, really, really good numbers with 3.26 yards before contact, meaning basically this guy doesn't get touched until he's 3 yards down the field. And then in addition to that, he's averaging yards, the third most yards after actual contact. So that's why Derrick Henry is so good, even though he's not that involved in the passing game. Now, things to be concerned about, right? Chicago's defense is good, and it's not a lie, right? They're a very good defense, but they're not as good versus the run as people make them out to be. In fact, Pro Football Focus ranks them outside the top 10. I'm not saying they're a scrub team, but they're not an elite top 10, top 5 team as most would claim. So don't be worried from that front. I do think that will help keep his ownership down. In addition to that, they are allowing 4.3 yards per carry. So that is about, I don't know, maybe 13th overall in terms of one being the worst. So they're still not the best in the world. There's nothing to be afraid of here. They're an average team, I think, versus the run. So Derrick Henry squarely in play here. He is expensive, but mostly because of that modest ownership. The other guy I want to quickly mention here is James Conner. This will be a chalkier player at the running back position. He's $8,200 on FanDuel, $69 on DraftKings. He's on the road here, playing in Dallas. That's the key. It's an elite, smash spot for him versus Dallas. 44 is the over-under. Pittsburgh is a huge -14 favorite. They have a 27.8 implied team total. So kind of everything you want in terms of a running back, checking every box except for playing on the road. But again, you don't have to worry here because they are massive road favorites at -14. He's going to be chalkier. Everybody's talking about him this week. He's going to be probably a top 10 owned player and a top 5 owned running back. Nonetheless, it's a smash spot. I don't think you can avoid it versus Dallas defense. Again, huge road favorite that kind of mitigates any scare of him being a road running back. But nonetheless, the dude's averaging 20 touches a game. He remains involved in the passing game. He's a 3-down back. He's a workhorse back. They're a little bit light on him, especially, when they get up a lot. So that's the only scare because he is injury prone. But nonetheless, the guy gets his still. He's a red zone back. He gets in. There is the occasional Benny Snell attempt to steal a touchdown from him, but nonetheless, James Conner still gets plenty of opportunity in the red zone. Still like to play here no matter what. Pittsburgh's offensive line, I talked about how good Tennessee's was, 3.26 yards per carry, or yards before contact. Pittsburgh's is actually 3.86, so another half a yard. Gotta like that. They looked really, really good over the last couple of weeks, that offensive line, in terms of a run game. So really good spot here. And then again, it's the matchup. Dallas's defense allowing 5.1 yards per carry. That's 30th overall in all of football. Dallas's defense is giving up the 8th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. Really, really bad there. And then their rushing defense is graded not 29th overall, according to Pro Football Focus. So Dallas's defense just really, really bad this year. And especially, they're not going to have Elliott. They're not going to have Dalton on offense. They're just going to struggle. I think it's going to be a big day for James Conner. Moving on to two other guys here, Chase Edmonds really stands out to me as a good value play this week. $6,700 on FanDuel, $68 on DraftKings. He's playing at home this week for Arizona versus Miami, 49 over/under. Arizona is a slight favorite at 4.5 with a 26.3 implied team total. Basically, he's the value this week because of the injury to Drake. Drake is missing this week, probably will be back next week, but nonetheless, Chase Edmonds is now the guy in the backfield. He's a solid home favorite, almost checks every box here for you. Pretty much does, actually. You just haven't had him as a starter yet. He has shown explosive playmaking abilities. He has played really, really well, especially in the passing game, being a third down back. Really has stolen a lot from Kenyon Drake. For all of you Kenyon Drake season-long fantasy owners, I'm sure you're upset with Chase Edmonds. But nonetheless, this guy has been really, really good, basically spelling him for a few carries and playing out of the passing game. In fact, he's averaged about 4 or 5 targets a game, not being a starter. Now Kenyon Drake is down. It's going to be all Chase Edmonds all the time, in my opinion. There's little, I don't know of anybody else that's competing for touches in that backfield. So you're going to get that same guy that's getting 4 or 5 targets a game, plus now 10, 15, possibly even 20 total touches because of his ground game. So really, really good spot for him. In addition to that, again, checking every box. Home running back is a favorite. Should get all the work, 60, 70% of the snaps. Gets a lot of targets out of the backfield. All those boxes are checked here for Chase Edmonds. In addition to that, though, the defense he's facing, Miami, is allowing 4.9 yards per carry. That's 29th overall. So really, really bad number there. Almost as bad as the spot that James Conner is, or I should say as good as the spot as James Conner. And then in addition to that, finally, Miami's defense is giving up the 7th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. They are like bottom 5 in terms of a grade for a rush defense. I didn't think it was even worth putting here. It's just a great spot for Chase Edmonds for this Arizona team playing at home. The other guy here, and this is by far the riskiest play I've given out, in my opinion, all year long. I'm not overly confident in this, but this is a play that can make or break a lot of different lineups, especially in GPPs. $7,000, $6,100 on DraftKings, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, CEH, right? This guy, nobody's playing him this week. Trust me. I don't think anybody, there has been some projected ownership, maybe like 7 or 8%. It would surprise me if this guy is owned that high, to be honest with you. And if he is, I may come off this. But he's playing at home this week versus Carolina. There's a 52 over-under in this game. Kansas City is a massive -10 favorite with a 31.5 implied team total. Again, this is not for faint of heart. This is an extremely risky play. This is GPP only, but I think this is a huge leverage play in my opinion. A lot of people are going to play Mahomes. A lot of people are going to look back to last week when they were huge favorites and it was all Mahomes through the air. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Le'Veon Bell, those guys got like 10 total touches in the game. So I think people are going to avoid him for that reason, and that's exactly how you want to think. You want to attack spots like this. I'm not saying play 50% this guy, but if you get 10% of him, you're going to leverage the field a lot. And in my opinion, it's a smash spot for him. And some people would also argue it's also a smash spot for Le'Veon Bell. And Le'Veon Bell does also add into that scare here because the guy is going to get carries. But if you go back the last couple of weeks, yes, Le'Veon Bell is new to the offense. Edwards-Helaire is still playing the majority of the snaps, 55, 60% of the snaps the last 2 games. So if you'll take that versus this Carolina team that is so bad versus the rush, you will definitely take that on the road here, or I should say at home here for CEH, checking every box, right? Huge home favorite, playing against a team that cannot stop a soul in terms of the run game, playing the majority of the snaps. He's still getting good receiving work. I think he's getting like 3 or 4 targets a game still. So he's getting all those boxes checked for you at the DFS running back position. again, remains involved with the passing game. He's still receiving red zone rushing attempts, even though Bell's in this backfield now. If you go back 2 weeks ago, I think he had 2 or 3 rushing attempts in the red zone, so you still like to see that. Again, huge home favorite here versus a really, really bad, awful run-stopping defense. Carolina's defense giving up 4.7 yards per carry. That's 24th overall in football. And Carolina's defense is giving up the 4th most fantasy points per game to the running back position. For any other running back, any other team, this is a smash spot. You would go there time and time again. People aren't doing it this week, again, because of Le'Veon Bell and because of what happened last week. I'm going back here. Let's see what happens. This kid is a stud. And if he gets, again, 10, 15, 20 carries against this really bad defense, good things can happen. So I'm excited to play him. I understand the price is expensive. I understand if you don't want to go there, I totally get it. But I want to be transparent with you guys. This is a play that I will be getting some exposure to this week in week 9. So let's move on to the wide receivers here. If I'm going to pay up at wide receiver, the one guy I'm considering this week, because it doesn't really fit with my philosophy, my strategy for the week, which is pay up for running back. The one guy I will pay up for is Julio Jones, $8,200 on FanDuel, $7,200 on DraftKings. Playing at home this week versus Denver, 49 over/under. Atlanta is a -4 favorite with a 27 implied team total. This is a perfect, excellent player to come back against that Drew Lock stack with. So if you're going to go with Drew Lock, pair him with a wide receiver, I always like to come back with another player on the other team. That's likely, most of the time, going to be Julio Jones for me. He's an excellent play this week, especially with the Ridley injury. If Ridley is hobbled, if he's going to be limited, or if he's actually out, that makes Julio Jones that much better of a play. And again, we're talking Julio Jones. You don't need much of an explanation. He's a great play with Ridley, but just how many more targets will go his way when Ridley's averaging 10, 12 targets a game? I mean, this guy literally could get 15 targets this week. So that's why we like Julio so much and are willing to pay up for him this week. Now, his last 3 games, he's been on fire basically since his hamstring injury, averaging 10 targets a game, 8 receptions, and 123 yards, not counting any touchdowns. He has started to get red zone targets. It's always been the thing with Julio Jones. He has not gotten a lot of red zone targets, but in fact, over the last 3 games, he has 8 total red zone targets. That's a really, really good number. I think that put him, just over the last 3 games, now propelled him into the top 10 or top 5 wide receivers with red zone targets on the season. So you really like to see that number's going up. That's going to make him that much more dangerous, especially at these price tags. This game is, I talked about it with Drew Lock, a potential shootout game, has a close spread. Again, it fits very nice with the Lock stack, the Drew Lock stack, comeback stack here. Really, really like Julio Jones. Couple of other things I will mention for him if you don't already know. The dude is top 10 red zone targets a season. I talked about that with 10 now, 8 coming in the last 3 games. He's top 5 in yards per route run at 2.83. That's a very elite number there. And then he is the second best wide receiver cornerback matchup this week versus that Denver team at plus 56%. So all good things for Julio Jones. Not that you need it anymore. He's matchup proof any more than you already have. But Julio Jones is one of my favorite pay-up wide receivers on the slate. Another guy I do like, though, is Keenan Allen, going right back to the well here. $7,500 on FanDuel, $7K on DraftKings. He's playing at home this week versus Las Vegas. 52.5 over/under, really good number there. Los Angeles Chargers it's basically a pick'em game. They're -1. I've seen it basically be pick'em in certain spots. 26.5 implied team total, though, for the Chargers this week. Really, really good number there also. This dude, Keenan Allen, just continues to dominate with Herbert. If you just take away injuries, Keenan Allen is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL, especially from a fantasy perspective. I think he's one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL right now. But so far with Herbert, he has a great connection and he just continues to dominate. I talked about it last week. Double-digit targets every single game. This has continued. It continued last week with Herbert. If you just discount or take away that injury game where he only had a target or 2, every single game with Herbert, Keenan Allen gets double-digit targets. So you will take that. You will pay for that in fantasy football in DFS. Week 8, if you want to talk about that alone, he had 11 targets, 9 receptions, 67 yards. So the yardage wasn't great, but he did score a touchdown. He's top 3 on this slate in target share at 31%. So he's getting the majority of the team's targets. At least, I wouldn't say a majority, but he's getting a third, basically, of the team's targets. He's top 10 in yards per route run at 2.29. Really good number there. He's 4th on this slate in terms of best wide receiver cornerback matchup at plus 40%. So it's a great spot. It's a great matchup of whoever he's lining up with. And Las Vegas in general right now is graded as the worst secondary overall in football, as according to Pro Football Focus, mainly because of two things, right? They're very, very young, possibly talented, yet to see with their secondary. They drafted a lot of young cornerbacks, a lot of young, basically secondary players. In addition to that, some of those guys are already hurt in the secondary. So Las Vegas is really, really bad in that secondary. The Los Angeles Chargers are in a great spot in terms of their passing game against them this week. That reason I like Keenan Allen. Two other guys we're going to talk about here. Brandon Cooks, $6,100 on FanDuel, $55 on DraftKings. This is basically the pairing to play with Deshaun Watson. I don't think you have to pay up for Fuller. If you can, go ahead. But again, we're trying to make these things work. Brandon Cooks with Watson does help fit Derrick Henry. It does help with some of those more expensive running backs. I'm trying to be fair with you guys. Yes, Fuller is a better... I don't know if he's a better play, actually. I'm going with Brandon Cooks. But Fuller is in play. Randall Cobb is in play. And Brandon Cooks, who I'm mentioning here, is in play to pair with Deshaun Watson. So he's playing same thing as Deshaun Watson. On the road here in Jacksonville, 49 over under. Houston is a decent favorite at -7, 28.5 implied team total. Really like that number there. This Brandon Cooks offers the cheaper value stack. It's an alternative to the Fuller, which is $1,000 or $2 more than Brandon Cooks here. So I do like that. I like this pairing. Probably my favorite pairing with Deshaun Watson, just because, again, it makes it fit, makes the strategy work, which I talked about earlier. It's an excellent matchup versus Jacksonville. This dude, Cooks, has been averaging 10 targets basically per game over his last 3 games. Essentially, I mentioned it here, the coaching change. They made a coaching change. All of a sudden, Brandon Cooks, who was doing nothing, became a 10 target a game player. So I really think that did make a difference here. I don't think it's a fluke. You see it over his last 3 games. It's a good number. I always like to focus on 3 games at a time. It's a really good indicator of trends and how players are performing. So the good thing here, the dude's averaging double-digit targets over the last 3 games. In addition to that, he has multiple red zone targets in each of his last 2 games. So not only is he getting targets, he's getting targets in high valuable areas such as the end zone. He remains that big play threat that he's always been throughout his career. It's also a positive wide receiver quarterback matchup here at plus 10%. And then Jacksonville's secondary, the reason we like Deshaun Watson, same reason here. Secondary is graded 28th overall according to Pro Football Focus. So really, really bad there. Bottom of the league in terms of a secondary for Jacksonville. Who are we going to pair with Denver, with Drew Lock here? The guy I'm going to pair is Jerry Jeudy. I think this dude is set for a big game at any moment now, and you got to get him while his price is so cheap. And this is what works here. That Drew Lock, Jerry Jeudy, Noah Fant, the players you're going to stack with Drew Lock really make it a cheap, affordable stack. And I think it's still a good spot for them. I think they can explode here in Atlanta. But Jerry Jeudy himself, $5,700 on FanDuel, $47 on DraftKings. Again, playing in the Dome in Atlanta, 49 over under. I really believe they blow that number out of the water here. I think I'm taking the over in terms of betting. Denver is a underdog here at +4 with a 23 implied team total. Again, great value here at that price for the wide receiver position. Extremely, extremely low ownership. I don't know of anybody that's really talking about playing this guy, let alone Drew Lock. But I'm doing it, so you know I will be. But I always like that low ownership. Gives you a lot of leverage here, especially when we play like James Conner and some of the more chalkier running backs. He had a career high 10 targets in week 8. Arguably his best career, well, he's a rookie, but arguably his best game came in week 8. Looked really good, had a lot of targets, caught a lot of balls. I think he was also his highest game of the season, the highest career game in terms of yardage too. So I think that breakout potential was starting to show. Really an alpha number there. A guy that's getting 10 targets a game, getting 29% target share, 48% of the team air yards. Those are really alpha elite wide receiver numbers. So hopefully that's what Jerry Jeudy is. That's what they drafted him for. He is a great playmaking wide receiver. Really, really good player there. But again, we're focusing on the matchup here. Atlanta's defense, second most receiving yards per game, or second most overall receiving yards in the NFL to the wide receiver position, second most yards after catch to wide receivers. Atlanta's defense is second most in terms of allowing receptions of 45 yards or more, and then they're also giving up the 4th most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. So in addition to all the things I talked about, him being affordable, you really don't need a lot out of him to pay those prices off, but he can put up a big number here. I'm confident in it. I really like this play. Jerry Jeudy in a good spot here versus a bad, basically a really, really bad Atlanta secondary, Atlanta defense. Let's talk very quickly about tight ends here. Two guys I will quickly mention. You know my philosophy on tight end. It's kind of what fits. There's only a couple of weeks this year where I really paid up for tight end. In fact, it was last week when we played for Kittle, who got hurt. But nonetheless, it's typically what fits because the other positions, in my opinion, are much more important. But the two guys I will mention here are Hunter Henry and Noah Fant. Hunter Henry, $5,600 in terms of a price on FanDuel, $4K on DraftKings. Playing at home this week versus Las Vegas, 52.5 over/under. The Chargers are a pick'em. It's a pick'em game, I should say. 26.5 implied team total. Really, it's just a solid price for him. Price is pretty low relative to previous weeks, relative to the season as a whole. He fits well with a lot of the stacks. Los Angeles Chargers offense, they continue to really score and put up big numbers here. 31 plus points scored by the Chargers offense in 3 of the last 4 games. So they're really, really high octane right now. I think that bodes well for Hunter Henry, bodes well for all the receivers. Now this guy, Hunter Henry, has not done a lot. His targets have been decent, 5, 6, 7 targets a game, but he's been catching really, really short targets. Hopefully things change here. I think he just needs to get some targets in the end zone, in the red zone. We're kind of asking for that, hoping for that here, but I think the price really allows for some upside, but at the same time, a floor of 5, 6, 7 points does not kill you with Hunter Henry. It's kind of what I'm going for here. Again, it really fits with what I'm working with in terms of my strategy for expensive running backs in the stacks I mentioned. He has shown the ability to get 7 or 10 targets a game. We've seen that in his history. He is an injury-prone guy, but nonetheless is a very talented tight end. 83% routes run, so we know when he's on the field for passing plays, he's not just blocking, he's actually running routes. He has the 3rd best tight end matchup according to Pro Football Focus, if you put any weight into that, at plus 39%. And then Las Vegas' secondary, I talked about it with Keenan Allen. They're graded the worst overall in the NFL. So he's just cheap and overall in a great spot versus a defense that really has not been able to stop anybody in terms of a passing attack. So I do like Hunter Henry at his price, but I also like Noah Fant here. Maybe a little bit more, but I know the price is more expensive. $5,800 on FanDuel, $4,600 on DraftKings. Playing on the road here in Atlanta, in the Dome, 49 over/under. Denver +4. Everything I just mentioned for Jerry Jeudy. Everything with Drew Lock. I love Noah Fant this week to pair with him. Fant or Font? I believe it's Noah Fant. Sorry if you guys really like him and I butchered his name there. But Noah in a good spot here. Good price. Fits the lock stack very well. I like both Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant here paired with Drew Lock. That double stack with him, I think it works very well, especially when I don't like very many tight ends on this slate. But the dude does offer a very solid floor. He is averaging a minimum, I shouldn't even say average, he's getting a minimum of 5 targets in each and every game this season. He's running a routes run percentage of 94%. Talked about 83% for Hunter Henry. This guy's nearly 10% more. He's basically not ever blocking. He's just running routes. This is potentially a shootout game. I believe it blows 49, that over-under out of the water. I think we're going to hit the 50s very easily, so points will be scored. Something that took me by surprise is this guy has 32 targets over his last 4 games. So as Drew Lock gets better, as Drew Lock is really ramping up the passing, well, Noah Fant obviously is getting a lot more targets. So really showing over his last 4 games. In addition to that, he has 5 red zone targets on the season. So we're seeing a little bit of usage as a tight end in the red zone, something we really, really want to see more of. But we do have it here for Noah Fant. And then in terms of the matchup, Atlanta offers a great matchup for tight ends. In fact, they're giving up the most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. So for that reason alone, I really do like Noah Fant this week. In addition to that, he fits very, very well with the cheap Drew Lock stack. And so that wraps up all of the core plays. I do always want to give you guys some other highlights. I mentioned, I'm not just going to play the 2 quarterbacks. I'll evaluate. I'll figure out who I want more ownership of as we get into tomorrow or into today, depending on when you guys are watching this. But Kyler Murray, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, and Big Ben. Those are other guys I'm definitely considering. I will not play all 4 of those guys. I'll play the 2 I mentioned earlier, and I'll probably play 2 more from these 4. I don't know where yet. I'll see how ownership starts to shape up in the morning. But nonetheless, I think all of those guys are in great spots for their own reason. As we come down the list here, Christian McCaffrey obviously is in play this week. Dalvin Cook, James Robinson, all those guys for various reasons. But guys, I do want to point out, DeAndre Swift continues to get 60%, 65% of the snap counts. Every single week, Swift snap counts have gone up for Detroit. He is on the road this week, but he's in a great spot versus Minnesota. I do like Swift. I think he's a sneaky play this week. Tony Pollard, if you really want to go there, if Ezekiel Elliott's going to be out, I think you can this week. I know it's a tough spot, but he is at home. I think they're going to have to rely on the run. He has looked good when he has run the ball. But nonetheless, you're going to have to pay attention to Zeke. The only reason he comes in play here, Tony Pollard, is because Zeke will be missing that game. DJ Dallas, almost put him in place of CEH. It was a debate between the two for me. I went with the more risky play in CEH just to kind of give you guys a perspective of how we think and how we put together some strategies for GPPs. But DJ Dallas, even though he's on the road here for Seattle, I do like him. Chris Carson, it has been rolled out already, so DJ Dallas is literally the only healthy back in that backfield. And then as we go over here, a lot of guys I do like this week in terms of wide receivers. Adam Thielen is one guy that stands out to me for sure for Minnesota, but basically him and Justin Jefferson are in play. And then I mentioned Randall Cobb and Will Fuller. Both guys are in play to pair with Watson. Tyler Lockett, I basically alternate. If everybody's going to go to DK this week, I will go to Lockett for Seattle. Deontay Johnson for Pittsburgh. I think he's still underpriced, has a lot of upside. Tough matchup last week, but before that, you saw what he really can do. He gets a lot of targets for Pittsburgh, pairs well with Big Ben, obviously. Jakeem Gant, that's a very risky play in my opinion. He should be playing slot for Miami. Whoever's playing slot for Miami has a really good matchup versus Arizona. Arizona does struggle versus the slot. I got some insider information from a friend of mine, but nonetheless, Jakeem Gant, if he's going to be that guy, he is in play for a ridiculously cheap price tag. You're just going to have to pay attention and do your research to figure out who will be that guy since they traded Isaiah Ford. So that's something to consider there. And then the only other guy, I guess, if you want to pay up a tight end, Darren Waller is the guy that stands out to me at the tight end position. And so that really wraps it up. Again, I thank you guys so much for hanging in there. Sorry that this video came out so late. Hopefully you guys get a chance to view this before you set some lineups. As always, make sure you check Daily Fantasy Nerd, the optimizer that is linked down in the description. I believe if you click the link, it's an affiliate link. It does help my channel out, but it does give you, I think, a free month. It helps me put together these videos, all of the lineups, all of the mass entries that I do, everything. If you want to be a better daily fantasy sports player, daily fantasy football player, you got to check out Daily Fantasy Nerd. I promise you it is worth the investment, and it does help you become a more consistently better player, win money on a more consistent basis. But as always, thank you guys so much for tuning in here, hanging with me. I know these videos get a little long, but the information is good. We've been white hot the last couple of weeks. Let's continue to roll into week 9 here. Thank you guys again so much. Please make sure you are subscribed to the channel, share these videos, give them likes, follow me at NoHuddleFS over on Twitter. All the stuff that can help me help this channel, I would really appreciate it. Outside of that, good luck this weekend, good luck in week 9, and I will catch you in the next video.